Custer County, Colorado, September 17, 1908. 8:30 in the morning. They brought them in a crate, not a box, a crate, the kind used for live animal transport, with ventilation slats on 3 sides and a hinged lid secured with a leather strap. The crate was on the back of a wagon, and 2 men carried it into Thomas Hewitt's workroom and set it on the preparation table without being asked to set it on the preparation table, as if they had been to this room before and knew where things went. They had not been to this room before. Thomas Hewitt had been the only taxidermist in West Cliff, Colorado since 1893, and he knew every man in Custer County who had reason to bring specimens to his door. He did not know either of these men. He was 51 years old. He had learned taxidermy from his uncle in Indiana and had been doing the work professionally for 26 years, first in Denver, then in Cannon City after his marriage, and in West Cliff since 1893, when the decline of the Wet Mountain Valley's silver economy had made Cannon City's market insufficient and the relative isolation of West Cliff had made a sole practitioner taxidermist a more viable enterprise. He did deer, elk, antelope, and the occasional bear for the ranching and hunting trade. He did mounted bird work for 3 of the county's wealthier households. He did occasional preservation work for the State Museum in Denver when their own staff were occupied. He knew anatomy. He had been opening and preparing and preserving animals for 26 years. He knew what the interior structure of a living thing looked like when it was brought to his table. The man who spoke, the taller of the 2, with a Wyoming brand on his hatband that Hewitt did not recognize, said they needed 2 specimens preserved. He said the specimens were inside the crate. He said the work needed to be done in the standard museum preservation method, with the specimens retained in their original form, without alteration or display preparation. He said they would return in 3 weeks to collect. He named a figure for the work that was 4 times what Hewitt charged for a full elk mount. Hewitt looked at the crate. He asked what was inside. The taller man said small specimens collected in the field. Hewitt asked what kind of specimens. The man said he was not authorized to describe them, and that Hewitt should open the crate himself once they had gone. He said Hewitt should not open the crate while they were present. He said it again, not while they were present. Then the 2 men left. Thomas Hewitt stood in his workroom for a few minutes after the wagon had pulled away. He looked at the crate. Then he undid the leather strap and lifted the lid. But here is what the Colorado State Museum, the Bureau of American Ethnology, and the Smithsonian Institution have spent 117 years making sure you never ask about. Custer County occupies a narrow north-south valley, the Wet Mountain Valley, between the Sangre de Cristo Range to the east and the Wet Mountains to the west, at an elevation of approximately 8,000 feet. In 1908, it was ranching country, recovering slowly from the silver crash of the early 1890s, with a year-round population of approximately 3,000 people and a summer population supplemented by tourists drawn to the mountain scenery and by prospectors still working the range's marginal mineral prospects. The county was not well surveyed geologically. The Sangre de Cristo Range on its eastern boundary contained a geological complex that the Colorado Geological Survey had been working through since the 1880s, documenting the Precambrian and Paleozoic formations exposed by the range's dramatic fault escarpment. Several of the survey crews working the escarpment in the period 1900 through 1910 had reported unusual formations in the high-altitude talus zones above the valley. Cave systems carved into the Precambrian granite that were notable for their size and regularity, but that no survey crew had entered in detail because they were above the accessible survey terrain. Thomas Hewitt knew about the cave systems. He had been in the mountains above West Cliff on hunting and survey work for 15 years. He had not been in the caves. He had seen the entrances on the granite escarpment above timberline from a distance and had noted them the way a man notes features of a landscape he works in, as landmarks, not as destinations. The 2 men who brought the crate had come from the direction of the Sangre de Cristos. The Wyoming hatband was wrong for the mountain terrain above West Cliff. Wyoming was cattle country, not the kind of place a man acquired a recognizable hat from unless he had been there recently. He noted this the way he noted anatomy, as information that would be relevant when he needed to interpret what he was looking at. He lifted the lid of the crate. There were two of them, lying on a bed of dry grass, not hay, grass, dried mountain grass of the kind that grew at high altitude in the Sangres, on their sides, curled slightly, in the posture of sleeping, or of something that had died in a sleeping posture. They were small. The larger of the two was perhaps 32 inches from the crown of the head to the heel of the foot. The smaller was approximately 27 inches. Their proportions were not those of children of those heights. The limb-to-torso ratio, the width of the shoulders relative to the width of the hips, the size of the skull relative to the body. These were the proportions of adults who had reached their full physical development at a height that no adult Thomas Hewitt had ever shared. He had prepared human remains twice in his career, both times for the county coroner's office when circumstances required it, and he knew the proportions of a fully developed adult human body. These were not children. They were something that had developed fully at a scale he had no reference for. He did not touch them immediately. He stood at the table and looked at them for what he later wrote in his diary was perhaps 10 minutes. Then he went to his instrument shelf and got his measuring tape and his magnifying glass and his preparation journal, and began doing what he had been doing for 26 years when a new specimen came to his table. He examined and documented. The larger figure, 32.5 inches from heel to crown. Head circumference, measured at the widest horizontal point of the cranium, 17.75 inches. His own head measured 22.5 inches. The skull was large relative to the body. The head-to-body ratio was approximately 1:4, compared to the approximately 1:7 ratio of a normal adult human. The face was broad and flat, with orbital ridges less pronounced than a normal adult human's, but with a jaw that was wide and deep. The skin, he confirmed it was skin, not any synthetic material, was a gray-brown color, dry and slightly papery in texture, not decomposed but not entirely fresh. They had been dead for some time, days perhaps, not weeks. The eyes were closed. The hands, 4 fingers and what appeared to be a thumb, but the finger proportions were not standard, were at rest against the chest. He wrote all of this in his preparation journal before he touched either specimen. He was a professional. He documented before he prepared. The smaller figure confirmed everything the larger had shown, and added one detail that he noted with a question mark in the journal margin. The neck, in proportion to the head and the body, was longer than he would have expected. Not dramatically so, not the elongated neck of a pathological condition, but longer than his eye expected when he had calculated the other proportions. He measured it, 4.5 inches from the base of the skull to the top of the shoulders. On a body of 27 inches total length, with a skull of proportionally large size, that neck length was within a calculable range of normal for the head-to-body proportion. He wrote, "Neck length consistent with proportions, but unusual in appearance." His eye was calibrated to human anatomy. What he was looking at was not human anatomy. His eye was generating a discrepancy signal at the neck because his trained expectation was wrong for the subject. He spent the rest of September 17th doing preliminary documentation. He did not begin preparation work that day. He had a deer mount due for collection on September 20th and 2 bird specimens he needed to complete, and the 2 figures on the table required consideration before he decided whether to proceed with the commission. He covered the crate with a canvas and went home at the end of the day. He did not sleep well. He wrote in his diary that night. The diary is in the possession of his great-granddaughter, Patricia Hewitt of Pueblo, Colorado, that he had spent the evening thinking about 3 questions and had not resolved any of them. The first question was what the 2 figures were. The second question was who the 2 men were and where they had come from. The third question was whether he should proceed with the preservation commission. He had been offered 4 times his standard rate. He was not a wealthy man. He wrote, "The work itself is within my professional capacity. What is not within my capacity is my understanding of what I would be preserving or who I would be preserving it for." Patricia Hewitt, the great-granddaughter who holds the journal, came to understand what she had in the family's possession gradually over several decades. She had known about the journal since childhood. Her father had mentioned it occasionally as the record of an unusual episode in Thomas's career, without going into detail about what made it unusual. But she had not read it carefully until after her father's death in 1981, when she went through the family papers and found the preparation journal alongside the diary in the bottom of a cedar chest that had been in the family since Thomas's time. She read both documents over 2 evenings. She was 38 years old. She had a degree in biology from the University of Colorado and had been a high school science teacher in Pueblo for 12 years. She understood anatomy. She read the measurements in the preparation journal, and she understood what the measurements meant. The head-to-body ratio, the neck length, the 4-to-1 proportion. She read her great-grandfather's diary entry about things a man should not put his hands on, and understood that he had not been speaking metaphorically. He had meant it precisely. There were things that, once a man had handled them, could not be unhandled. He had chosen not to handle them. She found this the most significant document in the family's possession, and the most difficult to know what to do with. She told the Colorado State Historical Society researcher in 1994 what the documents contained. He had been surveying professional records for a county-level history project and had found the Hewitt family name in a directory of Custer County tradesmen from the 1890s. He came to see the taxidermy records. She showed him the September 1908 entries. He looked at them for a while and said the measurements were unusual and that the description was consistent with reports from similar sites in the Southwest. She asked which sites. He named the Lovelock Cave material and the Spirit Cave mummy. He said the proportions Hewitt had documented were consistent with remains that had been found in cave systems across the Great Basin in the period 1880 through 1940. He said the Historical Society's project scope did not extend to this kind of material. He thanked her and left. She has not heard from the Historical Society since 1994. He went back to the workroom the next morning and looked at the 2 figures again. He worked for 2 more days on his deer mount and his bird specimens without touching the crate's contents. On the morning of September 20th, after the deer mount customer had collected and left, he wrote the following entry in his preparation journal. "I will not proceed with this commission. The specimens are beyond my professional understanding. I do not know what they are, and I do not know who brought them, and I am not prepared to preserve something I cannot account for." He covered the crate with the canvas and sat down to write his diary entry for the day. He wrote the same substance in the diary that he had written in the preparation journal, adding 1 sentence that the preparation journal did not contain. "I have been a taxidermist for 26 years, and I have never refused a commission. I am refusing this one because there are things a man should not put his hands on." The 2 men did not return in 3 weeks. They returned in 4. The taller man, the one with the Wyoming hatband, came alone. He did not ask whether the work was complete. He walked into the workroom, looked at the covered crate, and asked Hewitt why the specimens had not been prepared. Hewitt told him he had declined the commission and that the specimens were available for collection. The man looked at him for a moment without speaking. He asked if Hewitt had examined the specimens. Hewitt said he had documented them, as was standard preliminary procedure. The man asked if Hewitt had made notes. Hewitt said he had, as he did for every specimen. The man said he would need those notes. Hewitt said they were his professional records and he would not be surrendering them. The man said that Hewitt's refusal of the commission created a professional obligation to return all materials associated with the engagement, including preliminary documentation. Hewitt said his preliminary documentation was his own work and belonged to him regardless of whether he completed the commission. The man looked at him again for a moment. Then he picked up the crate, carried it to the wagon, and left. He did not press the demand for the notes. He drove away with the crate and was not seen in Westcliff again. Hewitt noted the departure in his diary and added, "He did not argue about the notes. He decided not to argue. I think he decided it would draw more attention to argue than to let it go. He understood that I had seen what was in the crate and that demanding the notes would confirm that the notes were significant. He left without the notes because getting the notes would have cost more than leaving them behind." The preparation journal entries for September 17th and 18th, 1908, the preliminary documentation Hewitt made before deciding to refuse the commission, are in a private family collection in Pueblo, Colorado. Patricia Hewitt is 67 years old and has had the journal in her possession since her father died in 1981. She has shown it to two people outside the family: a researcher from the Colorado State Historical Society who was surveying taxidermy records in the southern Colorado counties in 1994, and the independent researcher Gordon Ashby in the summer of 2021. The Historical Society researcher noted the entries in a survey log that has not been published and took no further action. Ashby examined the entries in detail and filed a Freedom of Information request with the Smithsonian Institution in the autumn of 2021, requesting any Bureau of American Ethnology field records pertaining to Custer County, Colorado, for the period 1905 through 1915. The Smithsonian's response cited the institution's operational autonomy exemption and noted that a comprehensive search of pre-1940 records could not be guaranteed. The response did not acknowledge any Custer County field activity in the requested period. The 4 times standard rate offer that the taller man made when he commissioned the work is a detail worth examining in the context of what it implies about his expectations. A man who knows what he is bringing to a taxidermist, who has seen the contents of the crate and understands their nature, expects resistance. He prices the commission to overcome that resistance before it becomes explicit. 4 times the standard rate is not a price that reflects the difficulty of the work. Preservation in museum standard method is less labor-intensive than a full display mount, which would be Hewitt's most expensive standard commission. 4 times the standard rate is a price that reflects the anticipated reluctance of the person doing the work. The 2 men who came to Westcliff in September 1908 had thought about what it would cost to get a professional taxidermist to preserve 2 specimens without asking too many questions. They had calculated the resistance premium and built it into the offer. They had encountered resistance before and had learned what it cost to overcome it. The fact that Hewitt refused anyway, that the premium they had calculated was insufficient, was not something they had anticipated. They had anticipated reluctance. They had not anticipated refusal. This calculation is visible in the taller man's behavior when he returned alone 4 weeks later. He did not argue, he did not threaten, he did not increase the offer. He collected the crate and left, and his decision not to press for the notes was, as Hewitt correctly assessed, a calculation about cost. A man who presses for a professional's records confirms that those records are significant. A man who leaves without pressing is betting that the records will remain in a cedar chest in a family home in Pueblo, Colorado, and that no one outside the family will ever connect them to anything larger. He has been making that bet for 117 years. He has been winning it. The journal has been in Pueblo since 1908. No institution has connected it to the broader pattern of small-statured remains documentation across the American West in the period 1880 through 1940, because no institution has been looking for that connection. Because no institution has acknowledged that pattern as a subject of legitimate inquiry. The Colorado Geological Survey's field records for the Sangre de Cristo escarpment above the Wet Mountain Valley, covering the period 1900 through 1915, are in the Colorado State Archives in Denver. Those records include survey crew reports describing the high-altitude cave systems above Westcliff. 3 of the survey crew reports note entrances to cave formations above timberline that the crews did not enter, citing inaccessibility. One report, filed in October 1907, 11 months before the two men brought the crate to Hewitt's workroom, notes a cave entrance at the escarpment's central section that the survey crew could see had been recently accessed. Disturbed rock at the entrance, a section of rope fixed to a piton driven into the granite above the entrance lip. The crew noted it as evidence of recent amateur climbing activity and moved on. The Geological Survey's field report for October 1907 is in the State Archives. The cave entrance it describes with the fixed rope is at a position on the escarpment that, on the survey map appended to the report, corresponds to the high-altitude terrain above the eastern drainage that feeds toward Westcliff. The two men with the Wyoming hatband came from that direction. The survey crew saw the rope 11 months before the crate arrived. The Tartarian hypothesis places the two figures in the preservation crate in the same framework as the other small-statured remains documented across the American West in the period 1880 through 1940. The Lovelock Cave red-haired mummies of Nevada, the Spirit Cave mummy of Fallon, Nevada, and the anomalous small-statured remains documented in the mound builder sites of the Ohio Valley. In each case, the official archaeological account assigns these remains to known pre-contact populations and disputes any anomalous anatomical characteristics. In each case, the physical evidence, the measurements, the proportions, the specific anatomical details documented by professional observers with relevant expertise, describe something outside the range of any population the official record names. Hewitt was a professional who had prepared human remains on 2 occasions for the county coroner. His eye was calibrated. His measurements are in his preparation journal. His conclusion, that the two figures were adults of full physical development at a scale he had never encountered, is not the conclusion of a man prone to exaggeration. He refused money rather than proceed with the work.
That decision is the most reliable indicator of how seriously he took what he had seen. The land above the Wet Mountain Valley's eastern boundary, the Sangre de Cristo escarpment above Westcliff, is managed by the Rio Grande National Forest and the Bureau of Land Management in an administrative arrangement that has been in place since the forest designations of the early 20th century.
The specific section of the escarpment above the eastern drainage, above the cave entrance, noted in the 1907 Geological Survey report, is in a wilderness designation area established in 1993. Wilderness designation prohibits mechanized access and significantly restricts the conduct of non-recreational research activities. A Freedom of Information request filed by Harold Vance in the spring of 2022, requesting all Bureau of Land Management records pertaining to cave site assessments in the Sangre de Cristo wilderness area since the designation's establishment, produced a response citing the wilderness area's resource protection provisions and declining to confirm or deny the existence of cave site assessment records in the requested area. The wilderness designation was established in 1993. The cave was noted with a fixed rope in 1907. 86 years separated the field observation and the administrative designation that would prevent any subsequent researcher from replicating it. Thomas Hewitt, 51 years old, September 17, 1908. He undid the leather strap and lifted the lid and stood at the table and looked at what was inside. He stood there for 10 minutes before he went to the instrument shelf. He had been doing this work for 26 years. He knew what a body looked like when it was brought to his table. He got his measuring tape and his magnifying glass and his preparation journal, and he did what he had done for 26 years when a new specimen arrived. He documented what was in front of him before he touched it. The measurements are in the journal. The proportions are in the journal. The neck length notation with the question mark in the margin is in the journal. The entry for September 20th, where he wrote that he would not proceed, is in the journal. The entry where he wrote that there are things a man should not put his hands on is in the diary, not the journal. The private record, not the professional one. He kept both. He refused the commission. He kept the notes. Both decisions are in the record. The journal is in Pueblo, Colorado. The diary is with it. The crate went back up into the Sangre de Cristos in the wagon of a man with a Wyoming hat band who understood that pressing for the notes would cost more than leaving them behind. He was right about the cost calculation. He did not reckon on the journal lasting 117 years. The wilderness designation above the Wet Mountain Valley created an administrative barrier in 1993 that did not exist when the survey crew noted the fixed rope at the cave entrance in 1907. Between 1907 and 1993, 86 years, the Sangre de Cristo escarpment above Westcliff was accessible to anyone willing to make the climb. In those 86 years, no academic researcher, no geological survey crew, and no institutional representative filed any record of having accessed the cave system above the eastern drainage. The cave was there, the approach was open. The rope that was fixed at the entrance in 1907 would have been gone within a decade. The alpine environment of the Sangres degrades fixed rope rapidly. But the entrance itself was accessible to anyone who could reach it. No one in the institutional record reached it between 1907 and 1993. After 1993, the wilderness designation provided a legal basis for denying access requests, which is a mechanism that requires active maintenance only when someone is asking. No one was asking. The designation solved a problem that had not yet presented itself. A wilderness designation established in 1993 to protect an area whose most significant cave system had been accessed in 1907 and not officially accessed since is either a coincidence of conservation policy or it is the formalization of an informal protection that had been in place since at least 1908. The preparation journal in Pueblo is the only document that connects the two. The journal is open to researchers. Patricia Hewitt has shown it to 2 people in 43 years. The third person who asks will find the same documentation the first 2 found: the measurements, the proportions, the neck length with the question mark, and Thomas Hewitt's conclusion, written in the private record rather than the professional one, that there are things a man should not put his hands